Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Hope you are well and are having a great day. All right, let's get this show on the road. Okay, Assalamu alaikum, Nasir. Good to see you. Just Broly, 3163. Salam, would you appreciate if I could join the call? Because I prepared some questions. Is that possible today? Yes, of course it's possible. For you to join. The link is there. I'm going to, of course, just go through a brief presentation and then I'll bring you on. I've already got somebody backstage, Philosophic. The name is, maybe that's you. If so, I'll bring you on right afterwards. Wa alaikum assalam and assalamu alaikum Muhammad. All right, good. Okay, so that's you. All right, I'll bring you on right after. Just gonna go through. It's not going to be a long presentation. It's actually just revisiting something I've already talked about before, but I thought I might give it a few extra references and just, remind. Right? Remind, because remember, it's reminding prophets the faithful. All right, okay, so let me get my presentation underway. There we go. Put myself into the corner, out of the way. All right, okay. There might be a pizza delivery interrupting the discussion. Pizza never interrupts anything, my friend. When is pizza an interruption? All right, okay. So let's talk about what I wanted to talk about. So maybe some of you would recognize the reference when God is invoked alone. That comes in part of that verse, which we'll speak about momentarily. But let's just talk about the thing we're talking about here, basically, dua. So dua in the Qur'an comes up in three forms, on three uses. It's used sometimes to mean invoke, which is what I'm going to be looking at now. Invoke as in invoke the law, right? If you look at the thumbnail image, I've got a bunch of judges there, picture of a bunch of judges looking through what looks like legal text, or their lawyers, but looks like judges, and invoking the law, right? So we'll get to that in a minute. And then of course you've got invite, which is dua, right? Or da'wah, right? The da'wah bros, the people who make dua to Islam, who call to Islam, right? So to invite or to call, like in Nuh alayhi salam, where it goes, فَلَمْ يَزِدْهُمْ دُعَائِي إِلَّا فِرَارًا, right? I call to them morning and night, and my calling to them, my inviting to them, my dua to them did not increase them in anything except flight, except, aversion of running away from what I'm calling to. And then of course you've got supplicate, right? To supplicate, which is another way of, again, calling. But in this case, you're making a supplication to a deity, oh God help me, right? The du'as that you see in the Qur'an, right? وَرْزُقْنَا وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الرَّازِقِينَ, and give us sustenance, you're the best of, sustenance sustainers. The dua of, the dua of Ibrahim, right? That Allah would send a messenger among his progeny. These are du'as as well, right? To supplicate, to ask God for something, or other deity, or whoever, right? So you have those three things. What I'm going to be looking at is the invoke one, as in invoke the law. And generally when you say invoking the law, what does it mean? It means to call upon a legal authority, right? Or a statute to support a claim or action, that sort of thing, okay? Often in a formal context, such as a court. Okay, so, it's an interesting overlap here in terms of English and Arabic, right? Where both in English and Arabic, you have this use of the same word, invoke, right? A lot of times we use the word invoke as supplicate as well. Invoke God, to invoke God. But more often in English, when we say invoke something, you're like bringing it to mind, making it present, right? So when you invoke the law, you're bringing the law into the current presence, into the current discussion, right? So you're invoking it as an authority, right? And that is not as often, it is in Arabic, but it's not as often understood to be there for the most part. A lot of the time, when people think about dua min dunillah, so dua to other than Allah, or dua to others with Allah, dua ma'allah, so these two forms which come in the Quran, they often think it just means supplication, right? That there are those who supplicate to God and then to these other deities, right? But I mean, one verse I didn't put into the slides here is, Ibrahim, when he asks his people, right? هل يسمعونكم إذ تدعون? Do they hear you? When he's talking about the idols, right? Do they hear you when he's talking about the actual tamathil here, the actual statues? He asks, do they respond to you when you call, right? Do they hear you when they call? And he basically says no, right? I'm sorry, they basically say no, right? We just found our forefathers doing this, right? And so often the case is that, to be honest, I don't think most of the mushrikeen believed that the deities actually responded to those kind of supplications, right? The dua mentioned in the Quran is more often, it seems to me, to be the dua of the first type, invoke. And also when it comes to the recent sort of like findings, which they need to be recorded. They are what they are. They're only inscriptions. I'm talking about the rock inscriptions in Arabia, where it's been shown that in the centuries before Islam, supplication to other gods than Allah completely died out, right? So you used to have rock inscriptions where somebody would make a rock inscription asking, a Lat, or asking some other deity for protection, for health, or whatever it is, okay? But in the centuries before Islam, I don't recall now exactly how many centuries, either, around 2 centuries or something like that. The rock inscriptions to other than Allah disappear, and you only find the supplication towards Allah only, where people in Arabia are supplicating to God only, nobody else, right? That's what the rock inscriptions show. So it puts into the question again further. It puts into question this idea that when the Quran is criticizing dua to other than Allah, is it really criticizing the supplication, right? The supplication to other than Allah, because that seems to have died out. Looking at it from the evidence that we do have, the sort of like hard evidence that we do have. So anyway, this is the idea. So this can be, it can involve inciting, this kind of invoking, this kind of dua of others with Allah or other than Allah. It can involve citing specific laws or rights, right, such as the right to remain silent or the right to an attorney. Okay, this is to invoke something. And it can also include citing a precedence or a person, right? So that's that, right? So an example of that, I think, is in this verse. Here it says, وَاللَّهُ يَقْضِي بِالْحَقِّ وَالَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِهِ لَا يَقْضُونَ بِالشَّيْءٍ, right? It says, and Allah judges with the truth. He judges with the truth, right? While those who they invoke besides Him judge not with anything, right? Meaning they judge with the batil, because if something is not the truth, right, There's no haqq, there's batil. جاء الحق وزهق الباطل. Right? When the haqq comes, batil is gone. Right? So they don't actually judge with any truth. There's nothing there that they judge with. Right? وَالَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Right? Those whom they invoke besides Allah. Why are they invoking them? They're invoking them so that they can judge. Right? They're invoking them as judges, not invoking them as, deities, as supplicating to them. Right? So this verse, I think, is very clear about that. وَاللَّهُ يَقْضِي بِالْحَقِّ وَالَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِهِ لَا يَقْضُونَ بِشَيْءٍ إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Truly, Allah is the one who is the hearing and the seeing. Okay, so they're invoked for their judgment. Okay, and judgment is of course related to deen, right? Hence we say Yawmuddin, the day of judgment, right? Yawmuddin is called the day of judgment. And when Yusuf alayhi salam in Surah Yusuf, when Allah talks about Yusuf trying to take his brother from his full brother from his half brothers, it's mentioned, there's a use of the word deen there, the deen of the Malik. It wasn't, the verse says, it wasn't for Yusuf to be able to take his brother in the deen of the Malik, of the king, in the deen of the king, except if by Allah willing it. So, well, what does that mean? It means in the judgment of the king, in the laws of the king, right? So the whole ruse that Yusuf did in order to get hold of his brother, which is by basically having him seem as if he'd stolen a goblet, right? That whole ruse was in order for him to sort of like be able to take his brother from his half brothers, right? And that was the ruse that he played in order to be able to do that within the judgment or the laws of the king, right? Because of course Yusuf was not the king. He had to act within the laws that were there. So the point is that you have also, when you talk about judgments, you're going to be talking about deen as well. And so you have this verse also in the same surah, in fact, right? A little bit earlier in the same surah, you have فَادْعُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. Right? So do dua to Allah, invoke Allah, being sincere to Him in deen, right? In religion, in judgment, right? Yawmuddin. Even if the kuffar dislike, even if the kafirun dislike it. So of course here a lot of people would take that to mean that what we're talking about here is supplicating, right? فَادْعُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. Okay, but supplicating to Allah fully, right, and only supplicating to Allah doesn't make you have complete ikhlas in your deen, right? That is not, what would that mean? Complete ikhlas in your deen means that you invoke Allah exclusively in matters of deen, right? In matters of deen. To have your deen, to have ikhlas in your deen to Allah alone means that you invoke Allah only in matters of your deen. Okay, so it means that on the level of deen, our invoking should be exclusively for Allah, even if the kafirin should hate it. So I don't think this is about supplicating as well. Okay, I mean, why should the kuffar hate the supplicating to Allah? No, what they hate is the judgment that Allah has brought. Right? They are ungrateful for the judgments for the deen that Allah has brought. Right? And they want to have their own bit of the deen. Because remember, of course, that rule of thumb, right? Shirk is ibadah to kufr, right? Shirk is the following. So the kuffar always want to have they want to set up their own separate sort of like deen, right? They don't want to fall under the allegiance or under the rule, the judgments of the deen of Allah, right? That is, of course, ultimately because they are related to shaitan, right? لما أحد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان. Did I not make a covenant with you, O children of Adam, that you would not be in ibadah to shaitan, right? Shaitan is the great kafir, right? And he wants to set up a counter deen through ibadah. So فَادْعُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ means, so invoke Allah, only Allah in matters of your deen, right? مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. Have your deen with ikhlas to Him. Your dua of matters of the deen should be with total ikhlas to Allah alone. Okay? And so you get to this point, right, um, where when God alone is invoked, or, you know, we're taking this to mean also when you talk about the Qur'an, right? So when you invoke something from the Qur'an alone, there are people who will not accept it unless you invoke with the Qur'an others as well. So that's what you have in this set of verse. And again, it's in the same surah, right? It's in the same surah. All of these verses so far are in the same surah, which is, it's something to note. There could be something else to look up within in terms of the theme of that surah. You have these verses here, verses 10 to 12. So just to have a layout of where this verse here is verse 14, right? This is verse 14. So this comes after these two verses. And the earlier one, the first one I showed, was even later. So what I said, إن الذين كفروا ينادون لمقت الله أكبر من مقتكم أنفسكم إذ تدعون إلى الإيمان فتكفرون. So this is one use of iman which is different here. Indeed, those who disbelieve will be addressed, or those who kafir will be addressed. The hatred of Allah for you was even greater than your hatred for yourselves on the day of judgment and hell, right? When you were invited to faith, but you rejected, you disbelieved, you refused, right? So in this case here we have إِذْ تُدْعُونَ إِلَى الْإِيمَانِ, right? When you were called, invited to Iman, but you rejected. قَالُوا رَبَّنَا, or you were ungrateful. Another way to read this, of course. You were invited to Iman, but you were ungrateful to this invitation, right? قَالُوا رَبَّنَا أَمَّتَنَا اثْنَتَيْنِ وَأَحْيَيْتَنَا اثْنَتَيْنِ. They will say, where is it? Our Lord, you made us lifeless twice and gave us life twice, and we have confessed our sins. So is there an exit in any way? هل إلى خروج من سبيل, right? فاعترفنا بذنوبنا. So we have conceded or known our sins. فهل إلى خروج من سبيل. So is there can we get out of this, please? Don't know why they have this formatting here. That's what happens when I copy it from a phone app. And then it says here, ذَلِكُمْ بِأَنَّهُ إِذَا دُعِيَ اللَّهُ وَحْدَهُ كَفَرْتُمْ. Right? So what is this? Well, how did they arrive in this? That's because when Allah was called upon, it says here, but again, I think here it means invoke, right? This is because when Allah was invoked alone, you disbelieved, kafartum, you rejected, right? You were not happy, you were not grateful for having Allah only as an authority, right? It wasn't enough for you. But if others were called upon with him, when yushrak bihi, right, tu'minu, right? When yushrak bihi, tu'minu. But if some others are called upon associated with him in dua, of course, this is talking about in dua. When yushrak bihi, tu'minu, right? So this is basically talking about dua ma'allah, right? When others are invoked with Allah. When yushrak bihi, tu'minu. فَالْحُكْمُ لِلَّهِ الْعَلِيُّ الْكَبِيرُ. But the judgment, it should be only for Allah, right? So again, we're talking about here this invoking for judgments, right? For matters of deen, right? It isn't just that they ended up in hell because, they were supplicating. They were not happy to supplicate to Allah alone. Like we said again, it seems that the pagan Arabs had actually come down to just supplicating to God alone. If we take the physical evidence we have of the rock inscriptions, which is, it is pertinent. I mean, we talk about for 200 years or thereabouts, all inscriptions to any invocation, supplication to others than God completely die out. There's literally nothing, right? No more inscriptions calling upon a Lat or Hubal or anything else, right? It's always just to Allah. So that's very pertinent, right? So here, what we're talking about really is not the shirk in supplicating, right? That isn't what's leading them to hell, right? When it comes down to this, it's really about the hukum, right? It's really about the hukum, right? And the interesting thing about it here as well, is that the hukum of Allah can be overturned by this kind of associating others in the dua with Him, because these others that you associate while invoking, when you invoke them together with Allah, through them they corrupt the actual hukum of Allah, right? The actual hukum of Allah can be corrupted, right? I mean, there's no issue in invoking somebody with Allah who, in this kind of sense of invoking like the law, who will tell you to who will tell you the same thing that Allah is saying, who will give you the same judgment that Allah is giving you, right? The issue is that this reverence that you give to them, such that when they say something different, now that alters the hukum of Allah. That will alter the hukum of Allah. Okay. Another set of verses here. وَمَا كُنْتُ تَرْجُو أَنْ يُلْقَى إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً مِّن رَبِّكَ. And you, or Muhammad is speaking to the Prophet here, were not expecting that the book should be conveyed to you except as a mercy from your Lord. And here, of course, the kitab can mean the prescriptions, right? It usually does in the Quran. The kitab means sort of the laws, the prescriptions, right? Again, the judgments, right? Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, right? Fasting has been prescribed for you. Illa rahmatan min rabbik, right? فلا تكونن ظهيرا للكافرين. So don't be somebody who assists the kafirin. ولا يصدنك عن آيات الله بعد إذ أنزلت إليك. And never let them avert you from the verses of Allah after they have been revealed to you. And وَدْعُ إِلَى رَبِّكَ. And here it says invite to your Lord, right? And invite to your Lord. وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. So here, of course, you can say it as invite, but you can also say وَدْعُ إِلَى رَبِّكَ. Invoke only towards your Lord, right? Because you're talking about somebody, you don't let them divert you from the verses of Allah, which have the hukum of Allah, which have the judgments of Allah, which have the deen of Allah. Don't let them divert you from that, and instead invoke only Allah in that, right? So it's another, of course, it can, of course, here mean to invite to your Lord, but I'm reading also that you can also read it as an invoke only to your Lord. But the next one, even more clearly so. Okay, so this you could say it means both invite and invoke, but the next verse even more clearly so. وَلَا تَدْعُ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ. And do not invoke with Allah another deity. Do not invoke with Allah another deity. So don't invoke with Allah others, right, who will give, other judgments with Allah, other deen with Allah, anything like that. Okay. ولا تدعو مع الله إلها آخر لا إله إلا هو كل شيء هالك إلا وجهه. And again, له الحكم. To him is the judgment, right? So that's why you don't make dua to others with Allah, right? They are not part. They are not. The hukm is only for Allah. Okay. له الحكم وإليه ترجعون. And here another one, وَأَقِيمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا, right? And direct your face, yourself, towards the deen, judgment, the instructions of Allah, right? Incline into truth. حَنِيفًا وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ وَلَا تَدْعُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَنفَعُكَ وَلَا يَضُرُّكَ. And do not invoke other than Allah what will not benefit you nor harm you. فإن فعلت فإنك إذن من الظالمين. But if you were to do that, you'd be of the ظالمين. So again, here I think that when you talk about invoking here, same thing. وَنَقِيمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ الْمُشْرِكِينَ وَلَا تَدْعُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَنفَعُكَ. So set your face to the deen of Allah only, exclusively ikhlas in deen to him, and don't invoke others in the deen with Allah. Don't invoke others in what? In the deen with Allah. Okay? All right, so that's basically it. Short presentation, but it's a reminder more than anything. All right. Okay. Let me just quickly have a look at who we have. So I'll bring you up in a minute, my friend. Philosophic. Just want to see how everybody else are. Always good to see you. Adriana. Dragon Light. Assalamu alaikum. Yusha Nouri. Salam. Amin. Free Sheikh Hassan Farhan Al Maliki. You're doing good. All right. Okay. So let me bring you on, my friend. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. How you doing, my friend?
It's good. Well. How about you?
Excellent, excellent. Let me see if I can. There we go. Maybe that's better.
So I got a new microphone. That's why I asked if you can hear me clearly.
Okay.
So yeah, so I prepared some questions for you that I could ask because it interested me, because of your videos and your presentations. And what I've asked myself is there like an ultimate philosophy one must approach in life, like a certain way that the Quran tells the believers to aspire? Is it like, there are multiple philosophies like utilitarianism and communism and stuff like that. Is there like something specific the Quran tells us to do, or?
I don't think so, to be honest. Not those kind of philosophies. Um, I don't think there's any kind. I don't think that you have this kind of micromanaging, right, in the Quran when it comes to those sort of things. Um, for the most part, there's only one real thing to aspire to, which is justice, right? That's the main thing. I mean, one of the things that the Quran says is that the whole reason for God sending messages and scriptures is that so mankind could establish justice, right? And there's no sort of like pointing towards, for example, democracy or communism or kingship or this. There's nothing like that, right? There's nothing which promotes any of those or discourages any of those. The only thing which is praised also in the Quran is that our affairs are done by mutual consultation. So it says that one of the things that's mentioned is amruhum shura bainahum, and their affairs are done by consultation among themselves, right? Which is kind of general, right? But there are other verses, for example, when Bani Israel, they asked for a king, and God gave them a king, right? So this idea that kingship is wrong. No, that doesn't have to be that way. The point is just justice. So there's nothing when it comes to like communism or capitalism or any of these kind of like systems that we have. I don't think there's anything. There may be things within those which the Quran takes issue with, but I don't think that there's any kind of like overriding philosophy for life in that sort of way. In the end, the Quran is more concerned about the religious aspect, right, of the human being. It's really about understanding who God is, who we are, why we are in this world. So if you want to talk about in terms of philosophy, that sort of sense, yes, definitely, right? The reason why we're in this world and where we're going and God's plan in it. You have that. So you have this story of humanity, right, from Adam to where we are now up to Judgment Day, and maybe what comes beyond that, even beyond heaven and hell. So there's that, but there's nothing in terms of these kind of like philosophies of organizing life, like capitalism or communism, nothing about economy, those sort of things. Yeah.
Besides riba, maybe, right?
Yeah, like I said, there's just certain things which I mentioned, right? There's the taxation, for example. The only real monetary thing which is mentioned is the taxation. Then there's the inheritance that's mentioned, but the wills, and these are all very. If you think about them, they all come down to very personal. I mean, apart from the taxation thing, which is sort of like, again, it's made for a lot of welfare issues, right? So it's for the poor person and then for the destitute, and traditionally people have given assigned different things, right? So the taxation, which are called the sadaqat in the Quran, the sadaqat,
Hmm.
which were implemented when sort of the prophet had had a big enough area that he could tax, was under his control. So it's very late before you got the taxation, right? And of course, the tradition mixes that up with the zakat, right? Zakat. They think that what the verse says when it says a sadaqat, they think that means the zakat, which is of course just can't be true, because zakat was something that the Muslims had to do from the very beginning, from Meccan times, right? It wasn't going to be that the Muslims were going to be commanded to pay zakat or encouraged to give zakat for 20 odd years, and then only in the very last year we are told who are the recipients of the zakat, right? So there's a mix up there in Sunni Islam, not in Shia Islam. They actually have that one right. So you have the sadaqat, which are meant to be for the poor person, the destitute, which is supposed to be the person who doesn't even have enough for a day, right? They don't have
Yeah.
enough wealth to take them through even a day. Then there's a poor person who doesn't have enough wealth to take them through the year, right? So anybody who doesn't have enough, a lot of people would be called poor now. I would be called poor, right? Somebody who, if all your income stopped now, could you survive for a year, right? If not, then the scholars would say that you qualify as poor. And then of course then there's the traveler, so somebody who's stranded, right? And then there's for freeing of slaves, right? And for people in debt. So these are even if you look at them, they're for people in real crisis, people in trouble. So you've got this taxation, which is set up to just help the people who are in trouble. It's not about, for example, managing the roads, right, or for prison systems, or for this. It doesn't mention any of that, right? It only
Hmm.
mentions in terms of the sort of like the structural aspect of that, or the components of this of a system, are the people who collect the zakat, right, or the sadaqat, the tax. So they're going to be paid
Okay.
from the tax revenue. وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, it says, right?
So the zakat is something only the Muslims pay to the very poor people. But is there like, I'm just asking this on the side, this is not the primary question of mine,
Yeah,
but
it's
is there
fine.
like a institution they have to pay that to? Because when I've been to the mosque, on Jummah prayer,
Mm.
uh, the imam said like you should pay to the institution, but that command in the
No,
Quran is unbeknownst to me.
no, you don't have to pay it to the institution. You can do it yourself, right? You can also pay it towards family members, right? If some family
Hmm.
members are entitled, you should give them to them. Of course, you're not trying to look for loopholes, like I give my wife my zakat and she gives me hers, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I know you're trying to like it's the point is to really help those people who are in need, right? So you don't have to give through institution. You can, right? If the institutions that you trust enough to give them zakat, you give them zakat, right? But again, I mean, we need to separate again. I mean, even now I'm using the word zakat. Zakat is in the Quran, the real zakat, where it's always mentioned, establish salah and give zakat. They're mentioned together, right? That is zakat. That zakat is to give your wealth to purify yourself from the love of wealth, right? It's mentioned in Surah Al-Layl, right? In Surah Al-Layl, one of the
Hmm.
earlier surahs. الذي يؤتي ماله يتزكى, the one who gives his wealth in order to achieve purity, right? So it's basically when you see yourself being overly attached to your wealth, right? You have to sort of like always keep that in check. Just how we have to always be, we have to keep reminding ourselves of salah, right? That's why they're mentioned together. We always have to be in remembrance. We have to, fight the ghafla, the heedlessness, with salah, right? So we have regular salah to keep that spiritual connection, right? And you should also try to be given regular zakah in order to fight that materialistic connection, right? Because in the world where we all are, right, we're striving for, a lot of the times that we're battling, barely a day goes by where we're not thinking, okay, how much money do I have, where do I stand, financially, right? And so that can end up becoming a very big attachment to wealth, right? So it's about breaking that attachment a little bit, right? So you give your wealth in order to sort of purify yourself from that love of wealth. If you see yourself really attached to your money, very difficult for you to even part with $5, right? Then you should try to start giving some of that, right? In order to purify yourself from that. So that's what
Yeah,
the zakat is.
I've actually seen people make fun of others who say like they want to pay their zakat to their poor parents, like literally make fun of because they invoke their scholars and that you only should pay your zakat to the institution, which doesn't necessarily make sense to me. Like
No,
if you
no.
really got poor parents. But
Yeah,
it's a
definitely.
discussion for another time, I think.
Yeah.
You know, what I wanted to ask as well is like, which does make sense with the thematic today, like Quranic Sharia, if it is really implementable in societies, because scholars usually like interpret it in the way that fits themselves and the state they're backing.
Mm.
How is it necessarily possible to implement the Quranic Sharia in a modern world where there's like prisons and not the kind of, you know where I'm hinting at?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. But I mean, again,
So,
when it comes to like the wording is sometimes a problem, right? So yes, we have this thing in the traditional sects, which they call the Sharia, right? And what is the Sharia? Sharia is basically, they call it God's law, right? Sharia means law, God's law. So all of these, many things are under the ban of Sharia traditionally. To pray 5 times a day, that's part of the Sharia. Fast in Ramadan is part of Sharia. All of these things also fall under Sharia, right? And there's the idea, even from the scholars, that we can never actually know what the Sharia is. The Sharia, in terms of God's law, is something which is basically like an abstraction which we are trying to arrive at. And the madhahib, the madhabs, the schools of jurisprudence, are attempts at arriving at that Sharia, right? So you have the Maliki madhab, the Hanafi madhab, the Ja'fari madhab. All of these are attempts at showing what they are at codifying a Sharia, right? So that's when it comes to the traditional view, right? They arrived at that. Quranically, it doesn't even mention Sharia much, right? The Quran doesn't even talk about Sharia, right? Very rarely. And when it talks about Sharia, it's really talking about it's comparing the shir. It's called shira, right? Shira'atun wa minhaj. It's not even exactly the same word. So the Quran talks about how every people have been given a different shir'ah and minhaja, right? Shir'atan wa minhaja. So if we just take that basic meaning and continue it in terms of laws, talking about basic laws, every peoples were given sort of some basic laws, right? And a way to implement them, okay, but differently. So the Jews have a shira and a minhaja, the Christians had a shira and minhaja, other peoples were given a shira and a minhaja, and they're separate, right? So there's no one sharia that God expects everybody to be um, involved in, right? I mean, that verse is in fact very explicit. It even says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. And if God had willed, He would have made you all one ummah, meaning you would have all had one sharia, the same sharia and the same minhaj. But that isn't his purpose. His purpose was to test each of us, each of the peoples, by what he has given us. And the punchline of that verse is فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. So rush towards good deeds. Rush towards goodness. Right? Race each other towards goodness by through what you've been given. To God you will all be returned, and then He will judge you concerning that which you differed. Right. So
mhm.
we have, for example, in Islam, the again, like going back to, we have the zakat and we have the sadaqat. These are part of our sharia and minhaj. Right. The Christians have other ways of of when it comes to wealth distribution or giving in charity. They have a whole other. I don't know. I'm not familiar with Christianity, but I'm assuming they have different ways about distributing charity, how you should give charity, when you should, to whom you should, etc. All of this, and these are two different ways, and we're supposed to race each other in trying to do the best with what we were given, right? And trying to race towards goodness. And It's part of the sort of like you could only let's say it's sort of like the part of the um, how colorful God wants humanity to have different ways of doing things. Okay,
Okay,
we're
I
not all
understand.
supposed to
But
be one monolith. So there is no really
is
one Sharia that can be implemented, right? I mean, you mentioned also, for example, when it comes to the, um, I think you mentioned the prisons, right, and things like this. I mean,
yeah.
another example, right? When it came to the sadaqat, there was nothing about it in terms of like, oh, now let's set up prisons, right? And the Arabs didn't have prisons, right? Even though the concept of prisons, of course, is in the Quran, right? In the story of Yusuf, um, Yusuf ends up to the prison. There's no sort of like judgment that prisons are bad. Like that, I remember before you'd have these sort of like more fanatical literalist Muslims who would say, prisons are terrible. Much better to just have all of these punishments of, cutting the hand of the thief or the flogging or this. Prisons are a drain on the resources of a nation. They're this, and and the person loses a huge chunk of his life, etc. So they start to talk about prisons if they're bad, but there's no judgment being assigned to prisons being good or bad. Again, there isn't that kind of micromanagement. What I tend to think is that when it comes to these sort of like hudud, or what's typically called hudud, even though Quranically they're not, but the punishments, right? That
Yeah.
they were given the way that they are because they could just be that's what they had in terms of the infrastructure that was available, right? They didn't have prisons, they didn't have this or the other. So it's sort of like the most basic way of punishing criminals that can be done pretty much anywhere without any infrastructure, right? Yeah,
So
you don't.
what you're saying, sorry if I
No,
interrupted
go ahead.
you, but what you're hinting at is basically, are these floggings necessary? I'm taking the floggings from Surah An-Nur. I'm
Hmm.
taking these as an example. Is that like necessary today in a Muslim society as well? Because isn't like God's law, isn't that like ultimate above all laws? Isn't like the Quran for the whole of humanity?
It is. But I mean, again, look, the point is justice, right? I mean, when it comes to the flogging, so it's a more of an odd one, right? Because we're talking here about personal relation. We're talking about fahisha, right? So indecency. So you're trying to discourage indecency, and when we're talking about the flogging for zina, it's actually really about adultery with a married woman, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not about Um, girlfriend, boyfriend, these sort of things, fornication or anything else, right? There has to be a married woman involved with somebody who's not her husband, right? And the reason for that is because it's going to impact families, the children, grandparents, nieces, nephews, all of that. I mean, you're talking about really the insertion of something into a family, right? So it's really about adultery of married women. Okay, so you have that flogging to really discourage that, and it says, "Will yashhad ta'ifatum will yashhad sort of let some of the faithful witnesses." So I think that you can definitely make the argument that it's needed. But another things, for example, like the amputation of the hand and these sort of things, you can arrive. That's not the only way to arrive at justice, right? Is what I'm getting at. The goal is really just to have justice, and so you can have some other way of punishing a thief, right? Prison is one of them, right?
And
Like I
it's
said in the
halal.
story of Yusuf, you have prison, right? It doesn't have to be the amputation of the hand, right? Um, so you can't have that. So the idea that the Quran is for all places and all times, it is, but it's not for no one comes to these sort of things. When it comes to these sort of things, it's sort of like more managing the people at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
With what was available, right?
Because I was
So
wondering as well, the sheikh you mentioned in your YouTube videos, I can't even pronounce his name perfectly, so I'm just gonna say sheikh to him. But
yeah,
I wondered what his position on that thematic was, because he said, to my knowledge, he said that he was interested in human rights and that he was like investing his time into this thematic, and I was thinking like, what's his position to this? Because
hmm.
these laws don't necessarily coincide with these human rights of today.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think he has the same view. I mean, I don't remember exactly, um, but from what I the impression I still have is that yes, he was saying. I mean, I could find out, but he was saying pretty much the same sort of thing. That look, in the end, the point is justice, right? The amputation of the hand, just because if a society decides we're not going to punish a thief like that anymore, well, it's not countervening the hukum of Allah, right? If you're putting in a punishment which is analogous and something which is similar, the point is to punish the criminals, right? It's not that it has to be this way and this is the only way, right? It doesn't
Hmm.
have to be that one way. If that was the only way it had to be, it would have been the same for every prophet, every messenger sent, everybody, and that would be the all over, basically almost all over the what we know from prophets. I mean, of course, we can't really know very easily what the prophets have. I mean, I don't know what they have in the Jewish law or in the Christian law, like what's the punishment for a thief, right? Um, but it's a very strange sort of like thing to believe that there's only one way to arrive at justice, only one punishment which is suitable. I don't think that's the case at all.
Hmm. So I have one more question, and this one's regarding a hadith.
Hmm.
So what I saw from what I heard from your videos was that you just follow like specific hadiths which are like historic but not necessarily regarding religious law. So I wanted to ask you, how can we trust these hadiths when they're in collections with other controversial hadiths? Like, do
Hmm.
you know what I'm hinting at? Like,
Yeah.
how can we trust these one or two hadiths in these books
Hmm.
which have so many controversial? Should we abolish them all?
Yeah, I mean, you could have abolished them all. I mean, I have no issue with saying that you can ignore all of them altogether, right? In the end, it's the issue of trust, right? How much, like you were saying, how much can you trust this narration or that narration? It comes down to really, I think, the core of your question comes down to understanding how we got the hadiths that we got, right? What's the process that came about? So just because a hadith is in a book doesn't mean that 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 all hadiths in a single book are not there because of the author of that book, right? In terms of where they come from.
Hmm.
These things are collections, right? They're collections. So if somebody's going around collecting reports, right? And any collection of things, right? You take any collection of things put it into one box. That doesn't mean being in that box means that they're all the same, that they all can't be trusted, that they're all wrong or whatever that is, right? Because they've come from different places, from different sources, right? So it comes down to just understanding the process by which we got these narrations, right, and the history that comes along, right, step by step, like every generation, how did narrating about the prophet and the rumors, how did they come about, how did they change from the first time of the prophet, and then the time of the early companions, and then later on, after like the fitna, what happened, and things mutated and changed, etc. So if you understand the history of how you get these collections, you will see that you can't judge a narration by the collection that it's in. It's almost irrelevant which collection it's in. You have to judge every narration on itself, on its own merits, right? So even
Okay.
within, and of course the even the hadith scientists, they know this. So even, for example, they would say that Sahih Bukhari is the most authentic connection. But even within Bukhari, they will say yes, there's levels, right? Within Bukhari itself, the hadithist scholars, the traditional scholars, will say yes, there are levels. There are some narrations which are much stronger than others, right? Even within Bukhari, you have a spectrum of the weakest narrations in Bukhari and the strongest narrations in Bukhari, right? It's not all one and the same. And there have been many scholars who have pointed out that some of the narrations which Bukhari included in his collection don't follow his strict, what they call strict criteria, right? And then of course there are other narrations outside of Bukhari which follow his criteria, which he ignored. He wouldn't put in, right? So he didn't include them. And so in the end, what you have when it comes to a specific collection is the decisions of the person, of the collector, what they will include and what they will not include, right? That's all you have really. They are deciding what they're going to include and not include in their collection, but each individual report um, can be judged on its own merit, right? It should actually be judged on its own merit, right? Just because a narration is in Bukhari, it should not be seen as stronger than a narration in in another collection, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
matter the collection that it's in. And most of these narrations which are in Bukhari, of course, are in the early collections before him, right? So he Bukhari took his narrations from from what he gathered. He was a collector, like I said, and some of the books which some of the people that he collected from, they have their own books, they have their own versions, right? And so you can actually sometimes follow up the same narration from Bukhari. You will see that he got it from, for example, Abd al-Razzaq al-Sanani, right? He got, well, let's say he got it from Imam Ahmad, and Imam Ahmad got it from Abd al-Razzaq al-Sanani. And then you can actually look at the books of Imam Ahmad and then the book of of al-Sanani, and you can compare how the narrations have been mutated between them, right? And you have that quite a lot. I mean, Bukhari, for example, he deletes parts of narrations which he does not like. So he will take a
Oh,
hadith which
really?
he, yeah, yeah. So he will delete different parts of narrations which he doesn't, because the sectarianism became more and more harsher, right? More and more sort of like, the lines became more and more drawn as time went on, generation after generation. So there were some things that the earlier hadith scholars were quite happy to have in their collections and narrate, but the later hadith scholars would say, no, we can't have this in our books because it shows this person or that person in a bad light. So they will cut out parts, and then that was actual known um, known saying among them. They would say, "انقص ما شئت من الحديث ولا تزيد عليه." Delete whatever you want from a hadith, but don't add to it. Right? So they would do that. They would edit the reports as they came to them. The point is that the whatever Bukhari has in his collection, almost all of it can be found in earlier collections, which we still have, right? There are very few things which say infarada bihi al-Bukhari, that Bukhari alone narrated it. That you don't find it in any other earlier collections. Remember, Bukhari is actually quite late when it comes
Yeah,
to
yeah.
the hadith books. He's actually quite late, right? There are number one, which is a number of ones which were earlier. So I think it's a daunting task, right? Trying to sift through narrations and hadiths and stuff like that. It is a daunting task. When it comes to like having safety, doing it sort of like safely, you need to really have a Quranic mindset first, right? I really think that you need to really come to grips with what the Quran is teaching, understand the 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 viewpoint that the Quran is teaching, or the deen, or the philosophy of religion that the Quran is putting out. Number one, and then also have as a sort of like foundation that the Prophet would not teach what is against the Quran or different from him, or that he followed in the same path as the Quran. With those two things together, then you can start to really sift a lot of the narrations, right? By just understanding that. So that's what I would say. I mean, it's when you see a narration in a collection, which says the same thing as a verse in the Quran, even if the Prophet didn't say it, you can be sure that he said something similar to it because it's similar to the Quran. Right? So I don't see a point in dismissing it, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, there's very little point in dismissing it, and of course the history issue is can be even more difficult, right? Because again, the Quran is very ahistorical. It doesn't really go into the details of historical events or the people or the places, right? It doesn't mention any of the tribes, right? Apart from Quraysh in passing in one surah only. It doesn't mention contemporaries of the Prophet, right? Apart from, Zayd, and which Zayd is that? Doesn't even say his full name. It's very ahistorical. But you can still, if you sort of have a decent awareness of the narrated history of the seerah of the Prophet, then and you can look, you can actually use the Quran to help you sift um, some of that narrated corpus, right? That can be done. That is actually one of the things, hopefully, a project I do want to end up doing, um, is trying to redo a seerah of the Prophet, a biography of the Prophet, using the Quran. And I'll use, again, that scholar you mentioned, Hassan Farhan al-Maliki. He actually has a long series where he calls it Sirat al-Nabi al-Akram, the biography of the noble prophet, where he's basically trying to reassess the what we typically think of as the seerah and seerah discussions from a Quranic lens. Because to be honest, a lot of the seerah is just about they even call it that maghazi, right? A lot of the seerah books are actually called maghazi, right? Which it just means expeditions. So they were literally looked at the Prophet's life as if it were just a series of army expeditions, right? They call it maghazi, right? Um, you have the recent one, the maghazi of what's his name, Musa bin Uqba, which was recently published, right? And it's basically the biography of the Prophet, but the titles are telling that they call the biography of the Prophet the battles basically of the Prophet. Well, it wasn't the battles, right? I mean, 13 years in Mecca, there was no battles. So he's sort of saying, look, at the majority of the seerah, the discussions that happened that the Prophet was involved in are lost to us, and we can only sort of like glimpse what they could have been through the Quran. So there was a whole cultural exchange happening in Mecca between the Prophet and Quraysh, right? As he was trying to convince them, of faith and stuff like this. There's a whole back and forth, between them, right? And the Quran sort of like shows some of that. If you try to follow along chronologically, you see sort of like the waves of back and forth of the arguments changing, of the arguments shifting, right? You know, for a time it's arguments about pointing towards signs of nature, and then we're talking about um, the stories of the past, and then there's actual arguments with respect to what is halal and what is haram. Why are you changing, making things difficult, right? The mushrikeen, like this, like in Surah Al-An'am, where they are often being shown as saying this is haram, 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 right? It's odd
Yeah.
thing that it's the mushrikeen in the Quran who are always saying things are haram. So the point is that a lot of the seerah, it was actually discussion and dialogue between the Prophet and the Quran with the Meccans in Quraysh, and also, and then the same thing in Medina. But that's lost to us because the seerah as it's written now, the biography of the Prophet that is written now, it focuses a lot on the battles when it comes to Medina. And in Mecca, it just focuses on sort of like, it ignores that aspect, like I said, focuses on some of the other things, right? I mean, not much happens is shown as happening in Mecca. There's the boycott, there's he's going to Taif and coming back, these sort of things, the persecution of the Muslims. But where's the intellectual exchange, right? We don't hear much about that.
Was there?
Well, yes,
Intellectual.
yes.
I didn't
Those,
know about that.
yeah, no. I mean, you can see it from the Quran, right? So you can actually sort of like work backwards from the Quran to see what they were arguing about, right? What was the intellectual exchange? What was the push and then the response, right? That was
Mhm.
happening between the Prophet and with the Quran and Quraysh, right? So you can get to some of that.
What I want sorry if I interrupted you.
No, that's it.
What I wanted to ask you is like, do you mind this discussion going any longer? Because I
No,
would
it's fine. It's
invest it.
fine. I don't think there's nobody else backstage. We're good to go.
Okay. So yeah, I've bought myself a Sira, a copy of Bosnian author who wrote a version of
Mm-hmm.
his version of the Sira, and I'm not entirely convinced by it. Like the stories, he mentions multiple Siras and then collected them, like certain parts of these books, collected them and put it into his own book, and he cites
Mm-hmm.
these like references. But I'm not entirely sure if these stories make sense. Like the prophet, when he was young, was accompanied by clouds which gave him rain in a caravan when he was very young. Like there was once,
Yeah, which shaded him and stuff. Yeah.
yeah. Is that like, or like the story when he wanted to go to, what do you call that in English? Like when someone marries.
Yeah,
What's
we wanted to
that's
marry.
Yeah, when someone wanted to marry, he went to the kid and heard music, and he went there and began to sleep out of nowhere, and then he woke up again and he tried to go again, and then he
Hmm.
slept again because he heard
Yeah.
the music. I'm not
Yeah.
entirely sure if these stories are true or if
Yeah. I mean,
they're
it's
made up.
we can't really know. I mean, they can be possible, of course. Um, that you had these sort of like he got like sort of like protection from doing anything wrong, right? I mean, you have this same thing happening to Yusuf alayhi salam, right, in the Quran. That the incident with the wife of Al Aziz, right? And the
Hmm.
verse says, وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ بِهِ وَهَمَّ بِهَا لَوْلَا أَنْ رَأَى بُرْهَانَ رَبِّهِ. Right? That she was inclined to him, and he would have been inclined to her had he not seen sort of like the evidence or the signs of his Lord. And then the verse says, كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَاءَ. Thus, so that we could divert divert from him the evil and indecency, because he was one of our elect servants. He's one of our chosen servants, right? That God wanted to to do something with him, right? He was going to be a tool for God, so these things had to be kept away from him. So it's very possible that yes, that could have happened. I mean, the story that you're talking about when it comes to it's about the wedding, the marriage ceremony, whatever, right? That
Yeah,
the
yeah.
prophet
Wedding, that
was
was the word.
yeah, that the prophet was, for those who don't know, that the prophet was, he used to work as a shepherd when he was younger, right? So this is one time he was, herding, looking after some sheep or whatever it was, camels or whatever it was, probably sheep, with another young boy in the sort of like the mountains or outskirts. And then one day he decided, he sort of like, so the thing about the narration, it shows that he shows him knowing that he was a bit different from everybody else. Because he tells the young boy, can you look after the sheep, and so I can go down to Mecca and do the things which other young men do, right? Like
Yeah,
like I'm not, I'm sort of like a weird person here, not doing what everybody else does, right? So let me go down and see what this is about. What's all this fun that everybody? So he goes down there, and there's a wedding happening. So he goes down and he sits down to sort of like partake of the celebrations, to listen to the music, and of course there's going to be dancing girls, and the way that the Arabs used to celebrate. Um, and then as soon as he sat down, he fell asleep, right? And then he didn't wake up until the morning, and he went back to the next day to herding of sheep, and the young boy who was with him asked him, so what did you do yesterday? He says, I didn't do anything. As soon as I got there, I fell asleep. And so then he tried to do that the next night. He tried to do the same thing, because of course marriage celebrations sometimes go on for more than one night. So he tried to do the same thing. He went down, he sat down. As soon as he sat down, he fell asleep, and then he sat down and then never bothered trying to do it again. Right. So these could be true. They could not be true. They're sort of like anecdotes. Um,
mhm,
we don't know, right? So there's a lot of the in the Sira, right? Even in narrations generally, there's a lot of things which you won't really know. Um, Generally, I would say this. I'd say you'd find that basically around when it comes to narrations and even the seerah, right, and the biography, apart from the broad sort of the broad beats of the biography, they're known, right? The broad beats of what happened in his life, we know, right? That there was a Meccan period and a Medina period that he married a woman called Khadija, right? That there was a boycott, and then that he was invited to Medina. He went to Medina, and then there was the Battle of Badr and Uhud, Khandaq, and then there was the peace treaty, right, of Hudaybiyah, and then there was the conquest of Mecca, and then there was the expedition to Tabuk, and then the final Hajj, and then he passes away. So we know the general structure, right? There are things that we definitely know. But when it comes to like sort of a lot of the details, there are things which are obviously not true, right? Maybe let's say around, I don't know, 20, 30%, something like that. Things which are obviously true, right? Maybe 10%, right? And this goes true. Same thing goes with just hadiths in general. But the majority are going to be something in the middle where it's not clear which parts are true, which parts are false. They're going to be like a mixture of truth and falsehood. You're going to things which are sort of like corrupted a little bit. You can, if you have a lot of knowledge, you can sort of gleam through them a bit and realize what the original sort of like narrations or things were, right? So you can get to these sort of things, right? I mean, an example of that is the splitting of the moon, right? We have it in the
Yeah.
Quran, the splitting of the moon. It says splitting, but it says when shaqqa al-qamar, right? So you have later narrations which talk about how the moon split into two halves and it was on both sides of Hira, right? But if you
Yes.
dig deeper and you look earlier and earlier, you find that the first narrations about this was that it was a lunar eclipse, right? That there was a lunar eclipse, and so you can
Oh,
sort
okay.
of you can sort of understand then what actually happened, right? And why did they call it magic? They've never seen a lunar eclipse before. No, so you can sort of like get to understand. You won't have any solid proof for this, right? But you can see what likely happened, which was that the prophet they kept on asking the prophet for a sign, and he said, "Look, now I'll tell you a sign that on this day there's going to be an eclipse of the moon, right?" And they didn't know about being able to predict these things, right?
You know what's
Didn't
funny
have the
about this?
calculations.
These
Yeah, go.
lunar eclipses, because I read about it in philosophy. Scholars and special people telling when solar eclipses or lunar eclipses will happen is like they ascribe magical powers to these people in the form of saying when lunar eclipses will happen.
Yeah.
If you've studied, I don't know, philosophy or something similar, you will know like the story of Thales
Mm-hmm.
of Milet. Like he told like 1,000 years before the prophet when a lunar eclipse will happen, and he said like on the right time. And this is like a phenomenon that's stretching throughout history. That all these people who have special power, not necessarily special powers, but have a special position in society, can't tell when lunar eclipses will happen. Which,
Really? That's interesting.
yeah, and the thing is also with these not necessarily prehistoric, but these very old philosophers like Thales and Anaximenes and these people is like there are narrations of them which were collected 600 years after they've passed away. So there's even the possibility that they've never existed. And there's like a similar thing going on with the prophet, where there are like so many narrations and we don't really know which are really true and which are not. So that's a phenomenon I see in philosophy as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly. Right. So
don't
you
you?
have you have those. So it's just very interesting, right? So you can follow up sort of like you can get to a very grounded understanding of the biography of the prophet, right? If you know the literature well enough, if you allow the Quran to sort of like help guide you with that, you can have a very decent, grounded version of the biography of the Prophet. But again, you just want the details of it. You won't be able to prove it so much, right? You won't be able to have like that absolute certainty of what happened. But then again, to be honest, I mean, it's not that different from anything else, right? Um, you know, what do we really know about Aristotle, about Plato? Their works in the end. Do we have any? We don't have the works in their own hands or written,
Yeah, yeah.
in early manuscripts. And these things were much later, right? Could they just be inventions of people later on? It's just the way it is when it comes to the ancient world. When it comes to the Prophet Muhammad, I think we do have a lot of solid grounds compared to a lot of people in the ancient world, right? As excluding those where there's like actual heavy documentation. I mean, like the Egyptians, for example, they documented so much, right, about their rule that what happened and things like this. We can have that, for the hieroglyphics and things like this. But other than that, there are just a lot of people of the ancient world who we are really relying on very late actual sources, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense, makes sense. But I'm very interested in studying philosophy as well. But the thing is, you can't really make money off of that. So
Yeah.
don't you
I have,
don't you
I have a
study?
very I have a very good friend of mine. Went to
Yeah.
university together. Emre Kazim. He actually did his philosophy all on Kant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so he actually wrote the book on on Immanuel Kant. His consciousness, Kant's view of consciousness. He's very into philosophy, and um, you know, same thing. I mean, he works now with it a little bit in UCL, and we went to UCL together. But
Mm-hmm.
in the end, ultimately, he founded an AI company, and that's where his main work is.
Oh,
But yeah,
interesting. Okay.
but yeah,
So,
working in philosophy is not you can't really make that much money out of
no,
it, right?
no. But don't you study something similar from what I've known? You had an interview for your work, like that you mentioned on your YouTube site. You asked people for an interview for a scientific work, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh no! So there was basically I saw something in Reddit. There was somebody who was doing a project, and
Mm-hmm.
they posted in Reddit or something. You mean I've got it on my community
Yeah.
tab. Yeah, there was somebody. Yeah, it's not for me. It's not my research. It's somebody else who
Ah,
was doing
okay,
some.
okay.
Yeah, somebody else was doing some research, and they were asking for volunteers of anybody who was Quran alone or Quranist to
Mm-hmm.
answer certain questions. I volunteered. I contacted the person. It seems to be a woman doing some research.
Mm-hmm.
But I told her, look, I'm not Quranist in the sense which I completely reject all hadiths and narrations and history. So I don't know if that's why she didn't get back to me or she just didn't get back to me anyway. But I thought it'd be good to just you know post on my channel for anybody who would be willing to
Yeah,
answer
makes sense.
questions, be involved in her survey, for her research, whatever that was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, thanks a lot. I respect what you do. I aspire to do the same one time as well. Like
Thank you.
I
Thank you
find the
so much.
research really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Excellent. Exactly. So, yeah, are you studying philosophy right now?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm still in high school.
Hmm.
So, but I
Yeah. I mean,
aspire.
I would. Yeah. So, what are you thinking of studying in university if you're going to go to university? I'm not even sure if it's even worth it going to university anymore, to be honest.
For real? How do you mean that?
Well, I mean, it's just that there's so many. I mean, you're going to be going in, you end up having, was it 4 years of study or however long it is, and the end of it, you have debt, right? In those 4 years, you could have, I suppose, worked on something else. Um, And so many things are going to be disappearing now because of AI, right? So many. I mean, it's very difficult to predict what to do. But there's so many people have degrees now in university. I mean, unless you're going to be doing something which is very practical, sort of like a degree where it directly goes into some sort of industry,
Yeah,
then I'm not sure how worth it is, right? And if you, unless you're going to be doing, like petroleum engineering or chemical engineering, or some form of engineering where afterwards you straight away start working as an engineer, or accountancy, or I don't know, these sort of like much more career oriented degrees. Is it even worth it going to university? And even that, there's so many people who graduate with those things now. It's very incredibly competitive.
me personally, I don't really believe that much that AI trend is going on in the economy,
Hmm.
because as you've maybe heard, the things that are going on internally in Amazon right now, with the informatic and engineering beside, well, for their websites and whatnot, like the crashes that Amazon had, it was actually, from my knowledge, from what I know, it was actually caused by the generated code that they made,
Hmm.
and they'd want to see like the profits from it. So they're basically coercing other workers there to use their AI models to like generate code.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, realizing that
Yeah.
it's
No, I
really,
I understand. Yeah, I understand. I also think, I mean, it's a bit of a bubble as well, but at the same time, it's also changing so rapidly, right? So maybe it's not there yet, but 5 years time, 10 years time, well, where will we be with that sort of stuff? So it's just changing so rapidly. So I don't know. I don't
yeah.
know. Well, what are you planning on going towards?
Well, I'm actually not paying any tuition fees or any
Hmm.
massive tuition fees. So that's why I said, well, probably philosophy is a side thing maybe.
Hmm.
And basically for the primary thing, do something from the industry, and I think that makes most sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd
Yeah.
agree. I'd agree. Alhamdulillah.
Well,
Good luck with it. Anyway.
thanks a lot. Have a good one, yeah?
You too. You too. Jazakallah khair. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. All right. That was great to hear. Let me just check the chat. I don't have anybody else backstage. Oh, I do. Said Professor. Let's bring you on. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. How you doing, brother?
I'm good. I'm good. How have you been?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Brother, I sent you email, the PDF file. Did you
Hmm.
receive it or not?
I did. I haven't had a chance to go through it, to be honest. Not yet.
Oh, okay,
Um,
okay, okay.
I'll try to definitely make some time for it, but I didn't get to go through it. Let me double check that I
Okay.
do actually still have it.
Yeah. Uh, I'm still putting hadith right now. I'm collecting the hadiths, the hadith those contradict the Quran, and those hadiths attack the Prophet Muhammad character, uh,
Hmm.
thing like that. And then I will make a commentary on those why these hadiths are contradict to the Quran and the character of the Prophet Muhammad. I make small comments on those. I don't have to work on those things. Just make a
Hmm.
small comment on those. Um
Hmm.
so I'm right now collecting all those hadiths which is against the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran.
Okay.
Uh, then I will publish. You read it that my PDF file and you edit that whatever you like to edit and just let me know you edit these things. Uh, so that's how I want to work together. Edit you add also edit. You can also add anything you want to add over there. and send me the PDF file. I edited PDF file, and we work together what to add, what to emit,
Yeah, what to
like
remove
that.
and everything. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and inshallah, I will do that. Just haven't gone around to it, to be honest, because there's actually a few other things which people have sent me, which I'm looking through as well.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, backlogged a bit.
Yeah.
Yes, but anyway, have you been? Other than that, how's everything with you?
What's that?
I said, other than that, how are you getting on? How are things?
Yeah. How I to get to know?
I said, how are you generally?
Oh, I'm doing good. Good. I'm also having a other project right now. I'm also an inventor. So I have invented some, some cleaning stuff, like a dishwashing cleaning stuff. Yeah,
Okay,
uh, let me show you. You can see if you want to. I will put it over here. So you see this one. This is
yeah.
this is the brush.
Hold on. How do I make it into a better thing? Okay.
Okay, this is a. You see the brush over here? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. This brush to clean the plates. The dishes.
Okay. All right. I
Okay.
see. Yes.
Yeah, another one I have.
Okay. And invent somebody. So you're an inventor of these sort of things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have actually invented many stuff, but this is the one I able to bring into the market and manufacture it. I'm manufacturing myself in the home, in my
Hmm.
garage. I will try to sell on online. There are
Hmm.
Amazon and there are many other outlet.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm trying to do right now. That's
All
the thing.
right. Okay. Good.
Yeah,
Good. Inshallah. I wish you luck with that.
yeah. Um, yeah, I do not reject all the hadiths. I'm
Hmm.
also pick and choose hadiths. I'm not Quran alone and just like that. I also pick and choose. If it sounds good, why should I reject? Even if his prophet does not say those hadiths, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Every good thing come from God. Every good saying from God, regardless it's from the Quran or Hadith or from the Gita or in the
Hmm.
Bible. Even any human being if said something good, is from God. Even Mahatma Gandhi says something good, it's from God. So
Yeah.
every saying, good saying is from God.
Yeah.
God teaches us every good thing. God teaches human being. So it doesn't matter who said it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, if Buddha said something good, it is from God.
Yeah.
Knowledge comes from God to human being. That basic things. So
Yeah. All
any
right.
good knowledge is from God.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's my basic. So that's why I do not reject if there is a good hadith, I take
Hmm.
it. It doesn't matter who said it. Is daif hadith? It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah. No, I understand
yeah.
about that. All right. Okay. Let me just check quickly the comments, and then we'll see. I don't have anyone else backstage, so if there's nothing else, I might call it a night. I hope the pizza arrived, huh? Our brother who was on just a minute ago. That you should have pushed it back. You're supposed to give your parents your money, um, not your religious duty charity. Yeah, I mean, you're right to, yeah, I understand what you mean. But in terms of the sadaqat, yes, the sadaqat, in terms of the tax, um, yeah, they don't have to be given to, they don't have to be given to everybody else. But I mean, they can be given to your parents if they are fuqara. It's charity about money. I've only been confused on what ma'ruf and munkar. I think we did a stream about that, right? Or at least on the ma'ruf, right? The ma'ruf is what is known, and munkar is the thing which is sort of like unknown, which is almost unheard of, something which is not usual. Okay, so the ma'ruf is the known good things, and the munkar are things which sort of like you don't recognize as ma'ruf. They're opposites. My opinion, God doesn't judge negatively because, to my knowledge, He judges only when the message comes. All right.
I think that statement correct. That statement is correct.
Yeah.
There are lot of ayat, it says about like a interest on money. If people do not have knowledge of it's haram to have interest, so God would forgive them.
Okay. Cool. The Dragonlight 2001. That's the Discord. I really need to try and join Discord one of these days, but I'm barely keeping up with other things. All right. Okay. I think we'll call it a night there. I don't think there's anybody else coming on backstage.
Brother,
Yes.
yeah. You know that there's Allah prohibit the meat of pig, right?
Yes.
So that's mean we can generally eat any pig, any meat except the pig. Is that
Yeah.
so? We can eat even a snake if we want to eat a snake or a bug, whatever
Yep.
bug, we can
Yes.
eat, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's
Right.
that's
Yeah.
my conclusion. Anything we can eat except the pig.
Yeah. Exactly. It's only lahm al khinzir, right?
Yeah.
Only the pig, nothing else, which has
We
been made.
cannot make a haram by ourselves.
Yeah.
There are
Exactly.
verses in the Quran we cannot make haram by ourselves.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Exactly. And when it comes to the food as well, I mean that verse is very emphatic. Right? It says,
Yeah.
say I do not find in what has been revealed to me anything forbidden in terms of food that can be eaten, except that it should be, right? So there's a very big introduction to that. And, it's also, it says, Qul, saying the Prophet say, I do not find. So it's, this idea that later on the Prophet would say, no, this is not haram, this is haram. It goes, it's one of the clearest things which has contradictions between hadiths and the Quran, right? So, for
Yeah.
example, the Prophet saying that you can't eat the like predatory animals like a lion or a tiger, not to eat them, or the something that the narration about the Prophet prohibiting the eating of the wild donkey, these sort of things. Completely go against that verse because that verse is saying there's nothing else which is haram except that it should be, and then the list of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can use this the prohibition of meat. I can use against the Quran. That the hadith is against the Quran because Allah
Yeah.
clearly say is a pig. Only the pig is haram. Uh, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Nothing else. Nothing
Yeah.
else. All right. Okay. I think we'll call it quits there. Okay. I'll see you inshallah next time. I'll try to go through that the document that you sent, and I will let you know when I do. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate. Assalamu
No
alaikum.
problem. No problem. Alaikum assalam. Okay, people. Okay, people. Let's call it quits there. Inshallah. See you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum. Rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.